In recent lectures, we've been looking at how we can trigger functions to happen by using the onClick function. So we were looking at how we can, for example, on a button, when we click this button, how we could change the inner HTML or the content of a paragraph, or how we could change the style or the CSS of one of our elements. So I just wanted to bring up in this lecture that that's just one event of very many. So I've just created something fun here, for example. We've got one where if we put our mouse in and then we take it out of the element, it's going to change the background color to blue. We've got one here where I can click down, but it's only going to change once I lift the clicker up. Then third of all, I have a little input here where I can put text in. The second that I push down one of my keys, it's going to change the background. There you go. So as you can see, there are many different events that we can use. It doesn't just have to be on click. So in this lecture, we're just going to go over how we can do a couple of these, mainly on mouse out, mouse up, and key down. So as always, I'm going to start from scratch with you. So I'm going to remove all of the contents of the body here in our HTML. As you'll notice, this time we also have some CSS. That's in order to create those boxes at the start. And then I'm also going to remove the JavaScript. So we're starting with a blank page. So just start off with, I'm just going to put in a h1 header just to say this is events. And then underneath I'm going to have a paragraph. I'm going to put text in here to explain the events. So that's kind of like a placeholder for later. And then I'm going to create two divs. And also we had one input as well for text, so I'm just going to add that in as well. We don't need to have any of this. So now let's start off just by doing a bit of CSS revision, and we're going to style these two divs. So let's have the classes. So we're doing class instead of ID this time, just because it's a good idea for you to practice using both ID and class with JavaScript, so that if this comes up in the future, you know what to do. So this first one, let's just call it div1 and div2, nothing too exciting. So now let's just check that that's all looking okay. Okay, fantastic. Now let's style those divs a little bit. So if you remember, for CSS, in order to style a class, we have to put the class, so that's the dot first, and then the name of it, so div1. And for this, let's give it a background color of red. Let's give it a height of 80 pixels, and then a width of 150 pixels. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing, so that it's easier to change it for div2. Have this as orange. Let's go for the height as, let's just go for 180, and the width can be just 50. Okay, let's take a look at this, make sure it's looking nice. Okay, fantastic. So we now have our divs. And why not? Let's add a margin to this one. Let's just have it as 100px. There we go, that looks a bit better now. So this is out there, this is down here. And let's add a small margin to this one as well. We'll reduce the margin for this one slightly. Let's just put in 20px. Just because otherwise it just looks a bit boring and it's all sort of stuck together. Okay, so now we have our HTML and our CSS all sorted. And I'm going to put some paragraphs in now actually into each one so that it explains what's going on for each of them. So that's not where I want it. Let's have this one here. Actually no, it might be a good idea. Let's have this just above actually. And then a bit more here. Okay, so in this first one, let's have the first one as mouse out. So put your mouse in, then out to change the background color. And then for the next one, we're going to instruct them to have to click in here. When you lift the mouse, things will change. And then finally here, please start typing to make a change. Okay, so now we have some instructions here that kind of make sense. So now we've styled it, so we're going to move straight onto the JavaScript. So the first one that we're going to do is we're going to look at div1, where you put your mouse in and then you bring it out to change the background color. So for this we use OnMouseOut. So up until now we've just been using onClick, right? But now we're going to be doing OnMouseOut. So before we even look at that, let's create the functions. So I'm just going to call the functions based on, oh, we need to give our input a class as well. So let's call this one input1. Okay, so now let's start with our functions. So I'm going to put my first function as change div1, so it's clear what we're doing, empty brackets as always, and then we're going to get started. So first of all, we need to access the ID or the class of this one. So we're going to do document as always, dot, then instead of get element by ID, we're going to be doing get elements by class name. And then the name of this class is div1. Then we're going to do dot style, then dot background color. Remember, we have to use an uppercase here rather than a dash. Then equals, let's go for brown. Okay, fantastic. So now let's go back in here, and on this div, instead of doing onClick like we were doing before, we're going to have OnMouseOut. So as you see, it's already suggesting some of them, and these are some of the options. So on mouse up, on mouse down, which is pretty much on click, on mouse move, mouse over, but we're going to go for mouse out. That's where the mouse goes into the div, and then once it comes back out. So we want to call the function, which I believe we called change div1. Don't forget the empty brackets. I'm going to save this, refresh, put the mouse in, and then so far it's not working. So let's have a look as to why that might be. Apologies, I realized that using class name right now isn't the best thing for us, because it does require a bit more JavaScript knowledge for us to work with that. So for now, we're just going to be using IDs. So we're going to revert back to document.getElementById. So if I do that here, I change this to an ID by using the hash, if you might remember. I'm just going to change this as well while I'm at it. And then instead of having these as classes, I'm just going to put them as IDs. So we will be using getElementName by class later on, but for now we're just going to be using getElementID, simply because there's just a few extra things you need to know, but we'll definitely be touching on it in a future lecture. So for now, let's make sure we have the IDs correct instead of classes. So do it here as well. So now if we run it, what should happen is when we put our mouse in, nothing happens, but when it comes out, the color should change to brown. Fantastic. Let's just make that into a different color so it's a bit more obvious what's going on. Change that to orange. Try again. Okay, much better. Let's just have it like this. Okay, great. So the next thing we want to do is we want to have when we lift the mouse up, things are going to change. So we're going to create another function here. And this is to change div2. So we're going to create a function called change div2. And using the open brackets and then the parentheses. And I will soon be discussing these empty brackets and why they're going to be so useful to us. And hopefully you're coding along with me now, because it's so helpful for you to write this out. If you're not, then definitely have a go at this straight after the lecture. I can't recommend that enough. So the first thing we're going to do is access the ID that we want to change. So we use document.getElementById, and then we're going to use div2. And then we want to change the style, or the CSS. So we're going to put dot style, dot background color, equals, actually no, yeah, okay, yeah, and then we'll change this to green, let's say. And let's also change the body of the whole thing. So for that, all we have to do, we don't have to do this to get element by ID, we just do document.body.style.background color, as always, equals, let's go for pink. Okay, now let's test. Well, first of all, we actually need to get this function into the div. So we go back to our HTML here. And so we've got the ID, and after this now, we want to put in, we usually have onClick, but this time we want it for when the mouse comes up. So we use something called OnMouse, and then you can see it's the first one recommended here, OnMouseUp. Then we just put in the name of the function here, change div to, with the empty brackets of course. So let's give this a try. So this one's working fine. Now when we click, and then I lift up, the color should change and the background should also change. Fantastic. And then finally, let's go for this entering the text. So we have an ID of input 1. Keep that in mind. So this next one I'm going to call change text. So in this one we want to, okay, this time let's do something interesting. Let's change all of the paragraphs, so not just one of them. So for that we can just do document.p, and then we can change the inner HTML. And we're going to change the text for all of them. So this is no longer changing the style, we're changing the text. And we're going to put a shocked face. You have changed all the text. So let's give that a go. So it looks like it's not working. So what we should do first is make sure that we've got the right name here. So change text. And of course that's immediately what I haven't done here. We haven't yet put in the event, or what we can call the event listener. So for this one we're going to be doing on and then key, and then the first one it offers up is key down. So that's exactly what we want. Then we want to call this function, which is change text. So now maybe you're starting to see that having a text editor like Atom or something that gives you sort of recommendations on what ones you can use or suggestions is very helpful, just in case you can't remember the exact wording. Let's just put an ID for this paragraph equals, let's just put para for now, and then instead of p let's do document.getElementById and call that para. So now when we run this, yay! So you might not have noticed that. Let's try that again. So when we start typing, you should be able to see this text here change. Excellent. You have changed all the text. So let's just go through all three of them. Put our mouse into this one, then out, changes color. When we lift the mouse here, the background color of this should change and the background of the body. And then when I start typing here, excellent. The inner HTML here changes as well. So that's it. To recap on what we've discussed in this lecture, the most important thing is just that there are a lot of other different events that you can look at. So it's not just looking at onClick, there's a wide range of them. For example, OnMouseOut, which we did here, OnMouseUp, OnMouseUp, which was here, and then OnKeyDown, which was here. Now again, at W3 Schools, if you search for HTML DOM events, you will see that there's all the different events you can look at. You probably won't need to know many of them for now, but it's just good to know that there is a resource here where you can have all these different things. Mainly it's just a bit of fun. So if you feel like it, this is kind of optional, feel free to have a play and give it a go. It's really good at just improving your general ability for creating functions, linking them to elements and stuff like that. So give it a go, and then I'll see you in the next lecture.